Hi guys, welcome to today's lesson. This is going to be just a short one-off kind of tip lesson, I suppose. Bit of a skill lesson, bit of a tip lesson. Something that you can apply to pretty much anything that you do from any of my courses or our courses. When you're working, copying something, or you're trying to use a reference, if you're doing a portrait, and the principles apply from life as much as they do from copying a drawing like this. It's a fairly abstract looking drawing. It's the bottom of a foot from a thing called the Barg drawing course, which is like a 19th century drawing course that has a lot of useful plates available. But you can use any sort of, you could draw even an abstract shape of your own and copy it to practice this method. But basically what I'm going to be talking about is the use of comparative measurements. So trying to kind of increase the accuracy of your drawing, or working through inaccuracies, correcting inaccuracies, just using your eyes, basically using your eyes to correct stuff with comparative measurements, so sort of alignments essentially. So horizontal alignments, so from one point in the drawing across to the other point in the drawing horizontally as you look at it, and vertical alignments, so how things align. And a good example, useful thing that's in this drawing is this guideline, which is drawn, this pure horizontal line. Shows us where, if we see a vertical line, if we see a vertical line, we can see the points where that vertical line passes from. And it's very often useful when you first start the drawing to just put in an equivalent horizontal or vertical line if you've got that sort of guide. So I'm going to start that with mine. You don't always have to do this, but it can be useful. A little bit of a stand-in for a grid. People often use grids, but very often just a simple central guideline can also be really good. So it may end up, hopefully will end up fairly accurate, this copy that I'm doing, but I'm really going to be focusing on the principles of using alignments the way that I copy it. So it's going to be very alignment heavy, and we're going to try to do that just by basically plotting, so almost like we're putting coordinates, and I'm really making this very mechanical. You don't want it to be this mechanical when you're actually drawing, but for the sake of the sort of example what we're doing here, we're going to keep it fairly mechanical. So the first thing I'm looking for are just the places where we cross this vertical. So we've got this point here, and down below another point down there, and we've got that highest point there I just plotted in. And a sort of lowest point down here. And it's slightly different. Very often when I start drawings, or you'll have seen in previous videos, I kind of box things in. I'm not doing that today just because I'm trying to focus mostly on trying to find where something can be placed just by using these horizontal or vertical alignments. So this is the first kind of good example. If I was to draw a horizontal line, imaginary line across from this point here, I want to look for where does that hit, basically. And it hits, you know, we sort of go horizontally across. At a certain point we hit this line here, and then it still extends a bit further along, so maybe get to about there, but slightly further extension, and about here is where the edge of that foot would roughly be. So I can kind of join the dots. A little bit of dot joining is what we're doing today. I can copy this angle, so as well as alignments we can sort of always think about angles. So I've got this, trying to copy the exact angle of that foot as it tilts up, and then thinking about how long is it between there and there. So it's probably about that long. Then that becomes a straight line, roughly straight line that travels up and just goes over that point there. So you can see that's got me pretty close. I mean, there's going to be some changes that I can make, but to start with I just want to get stuff blocked in. pretty close to the foot that you can see on the paper there. So again, if I think about alignments, I can sort of travel horizontally across and see what sort of triangle do I want to make. So if we imagine that as a triangle, is that about the same? And when I'm drawing, copying life, all this stuff's just happening in my head basically. But when you first start, you want to practice these principles, or sort of think of these principles a bit more rigidly. But you don't always have to do it. So then the next thing we want is, if I take a horizontal across here, I can see that the sort of base of the heel sits just a little bit lower than that point, that horizontal point there. So I'm just moving this line down, always willing to make adjustments, always good to make adjustments. So just about getting all of this blocked in, and I want to get fairly quickly to the point where the foot's approximately blocked in, because that's when the actual alignment stuff is going to happen, because we want to have something to correct with our alignment. So the initial block-in stage is maybe not the most important thing that you can take away from this lesson. It's going to be the alignment stuff, but you still get an idea of how I've already started to kind of use alignments a little bit. And then also just used fairly standard little measuring devices to get started. And I can see there's things that are a bit off, like there's a bit of a wonkiness to my drawing relative to what's actually there, but we're going to try to use alignments to help us to correct those issues. It's not too much more to do now. I'll pop these toes in. So they've roughly got that foot blocked in. So you get an idea of the initial block in, and now we're going to try to adjust this around and use those adjustments to make it more correct. And that's the point of an adjustment. So let's try to just go through correcting this primarily using horizontal and vertical alignments. A good starting point whenever you're making corrections to a representational piece of art is to think about what actually looks like it's working really well and what doesn't seem to be working so well, and try to stick with what's working well and be happy to adjust stuff that isn't working. So to my mind, I think I quite like the bottom of this foot here. This feels like it roughly matches what I'm looking at over here. So I'm a bit happy with that. So these might be good kind of anchor points. Points in the drawing that I keep solid and I shift everything else around it, because you don't want everything to constantly be in a state of flux. If that happens, then you end up kind of constantly adjusting and everything still always stays wrong. So you want to keep something permanent within the drawing and pick the bit that you feel works the best. So for me, this bit works the best, what I've got down so far. Whereas up here feels a bit stretched. There's things that feel a bit wrong about the shape of the heel in mine versus the original. So that's where I'm kind of going to be happier to make changes. And there's also something a bit wrong with how these toes are spaced and so on. So as I say, let's kind of reassert the bits. Maybe go a little bit darker, just with those parts of the drawing that seem to work the best. So I'm pretty happy with this line. And that line there. So I'm happy with that. Now I want to think about, how do I need to adjust stuff around this these points in order to make them more accurate. Actually, I might just flatten that out just ever so slightly. So this needs to flatten a little bit as well. It's a bit better. And I can see that this point sits maybe just a bit closer in than I have it. So there, can make quite a big correction. And that's going to adjust these toes a lot as well. So this doesn't feel too off. Again, I'm just kind of going through what seems correct, what doesn't seem correct. So this line up to about this point here seems about right. So if I travel horizontal across there, I can see that at about that point, that's the horizontal. Just slightly above that, it's going to be where I want this line that travels down. And so now that relationship seems to be working a bit better. Although maybe actually, now that I've corrected that, this feels like it needs to tilt a bit further back out. But these corrections are all part of the process, this type of drawing. When you're first starting a drawing, you want to correct things a lot at this early stage. Being willing to correct is probably the most important, most useful. It's not even a skill, it's more just a kind of something that you allow yourself to do. It'll help the most when you're trying to work through problems in drawings. So if we say that's not too bad now, what's going on there? Maybe just nudge that up slightly. I'm going to go back down to here because this is definitely now wrong. You can see how tiny my toe is, having moved that in. So I may as well just go in and erase all of that stuff and start from scratch. It's also simple. So using a vertical alignment, if I imagine a line traveling up from that point there, I can see the sort of crease of the big toe sits just inside about that point there. And I can see, I end up with the triangle maybe about this sort of size. If I do a horizontal across there, then this line makes its way across. So it's about that point, so yeah, that's not too bad. Yeah, that's a lot better. So you can see that first set of adjustments just corrects those toes a lot. Maybe still not perfect, but it's certainly a lot better, more accurate than it was before. So let's do the same thing up here. So I was happy with where we got up to at that point. I'm pretty much happy with where this is crossing. So those are my two kind of, again, anchor points. I'm happy with what they're like relative to the lower section. So now I need to make the heel and so forth work better. So I can see that the heel has to kick out a lot more. Well, the line's far too close in. So first thing I'll do is just have that first line in, erase what's there already. If you leave what's there already for too long, it can get a bit distracting. So just erase stuff if it's wrong. If you realize that something's wrong, just get rid of it. And then I can kind of make my way up from this line here. I know that vertically we're going to travel up. Got this crossover here. How much space is there? Then there's that crossover there. And from that crossover, got the bit of the ankle that we can see. And then everything's gone quite significantly wrong up here, so I'm going to just erase most of that back as well, erase most of this. Got a vague idea because the ghost of it is still there, what happened. Drop this down. Again, I can kind of see if I draw a horizontal alignment that I want that to hit at about this point. That roughly matches horizontally. So we've got yeah, that's working better now, those lines. You can see that this one wants to curve, drop down a little bit more. And then I can see from about this point here, if I travel a line up, that's what's going to hit the heel, which is probably about right what I had originally. But I can see that from this point, so that far across from that edge, that line doesn't need to be as tall, so it's maybe going to travel this high up. And then I can see horizontally again, if I drew a line across, it's about this point. So yeah, about there we're hitting the heel. And if we dropped a line vertical down, we can see we're getting just inside, so about, we're probably, this maybe needs to travel a little bit further. But my adjustments are getting smaller and smaller as I work, which means I'm getting closer to something that's more accurate, which is the idea. And then from there it gets easier. Now we've got a lot more in place to kind of stitch everything together, but I'm still kind of always constantly looking across these shapes, these alignments. So where, if I want this little part of the heel, where does it sit relative to those bits? And so on. And so it's still not perfect, I could keep making more adjustments, but you could see from that original block in how I've kind of gone about just using reference points, so finding that locked in position down the bottom of the foot that I was happy with, saying that's good, and then from that point going back and reworking everything gradually. And as I say, it's not absolutely not exactly the same, but you can see it's corrected a lot, so it's definitely closer than it was. And you're always just trying to move stuff to be closer than it was before. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect at the beginning. It doesn't have to be perfect after this first stage of correction. But the important thing is that you have these skills to make corrections and kind of get it closer all the time. Nothing's ever kind of perfect initially. You can always go in and correct it, or you're always going to need to go in and correct stuff. So yeah, that's it for this week's short session. I'll be returning with a longer series next time. But this can be applied to anything you do from any of the courses that we have. So as always, subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with what new stuff we're releasing. There's new stuff from myself and interviews and other lessons every week. So definitely keep an eye out for what's going on by subscribing. And you can also click the link through to the website and find out what sort of qualifications that we offer online in art education and those sorts of things as well. So yeah, I'll see you guys soon.